Hi everyone, it's Monica and welcome to 12 Weeks of Christmas. Each week I'm going to be bringing you a new video where I'm sharing with you a project along with a technique to go along with the project. We're going to have a lot of fun leading us up to Christmas, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Since this is a 12 Weeks of Christmas, I thought it might be kind of fun to use my 12 Days of Christmas stamps. And I've had these stamps for a couple of years. I got them last Christmas and I actually, believe it or not, found it at the flea market here in the local in my town, and they were brand new from Graphic 45 and I've yet to use them. So I decided it would be appropriate to start out my series creating 12 tags using 12 Days of Christmas. Now I could easily just stamp the 12 days on the tags, but I thought that looked a little bit plain, so I want to show you a technique using embossing glaze from Tim Holtz on how you can add a little bit of interest and I say brighten up, but really we're going to grunge it down to create nice Christmas tags. Now, one of the things that I love about Tim Holtz's distress glaze is that it's translucent, and what that means is even though it has some color to it, kind of a tinge, it really is transparent, and I really love this technique. So first what I want to do is I want to go ahead and use my oversized music stamp to cover the tag. And as you can see, since it is oversized, I'm not able to use my magnets, but I'm just going to make sure I have enough ink on the first swipe. Now I didn't want the music to overtake the background, so I'm using some ink that accompanies this color. And as you can see, I'm using the Salvage Patina, and it really works well for this background. And as you can see, the background is just enough. It doesn't overtake the tag, so when I go to stamp the image, the music will just be part of the background and it really won't be a focal point. Now, ordinarily when I'm creating cards or tags that are somewhat similar, I'll do an assembly line. So I'll cut all of my tags out, and then ordinarily I would do all of my background stamping first, but I wanted to go ahead and just stamp a couple of them so we can go ahead and work into the next step. All right, so since I am going to only be doing one swipe here using my Misty, I want to make sure I have enough ink the first time around, and I'm just putting nice pressure to make sure I get an even coverage. Now that I have my background stamped, I want to go ahead and work on my focal point. And my focal point, of course, is going to be the 12 Days of Christmas stamps. Now, what's nice about these stamps is they are small enough where I can go ahead and use my magnets to hold them in place. Because when you're stamping with a silhouette type of stamp, and what I mean by that is a stamp that has lots of black filled in background, you're going to want to make sure that you use some sort of a stamping tool, so that way you can stamp it over and over again in the same place to make sure you get a nice crisp image. And stamping it over and over again 2 to 3 times adds lots of ink to your image, so it's going to hold our embossing powder really nicely. Now with smaller images like this, usually what I'll do, instead of pouring the embossing powder right onto my image, I just basically take my tag and I dump it right into my embossing powder. And this really is easy because I can create a nice assembly line. I can go ahead and stamp my image, dip it right into the embossing powder, and then set it aside. So that way I can have several cards, or I should say several tags that are stamped, have the embossing powder, and they're set aside. So when I bring out my heating tool, I can heat them all at the same time. I also ended up adding a small Merry Christmas stamp at the bottom of the tag, and I could have easily added that stamped image again and set it aside, but that's not going to have as much ink as my focal point. So I decided to just go ahead and stamp that sentiment after I've embossed the bigger focal point. All right, so now here I have my embossing powder, like I said, and I'm basically going to just dip it right in. It's really easy to go ahead and add my embossing powder using this little container where I store it. And as you can see, you can see a little bit of sparkle in this embossing powder. This is clear embossing powder, and I have a couple of jars that I just added together, and one of them actually had a little bit of a sparkle, and I really love the effect. Now, if you're not into the grunge like I am, you can easily stop here. You have a perfectly fine stamped image. We've added some embossing powder, and we're going to have a little sentiment. All you really need to do is add some string to your tag, and you can call it a day. But you know me, I like to add grunge. So we're going to go ahead and grunge this tag up just a little bit more. All right, so two staples in my craft room for my distress inks are walnut stain and vintage photo. Walnut stain is a darker brown, and the vintage photo is just a lighter brown. So what I'm going to do after I stamp my image here and I add some embossing powder to it, I'm going to go ahead and add some of my distress inks to the edges. Now I have a little dauber that I use, and when I am working with distress inks, I don't mind using one dauber that has similar inks. So for instance, the walnut stain and the vintage photo are both brown, so I'll typically use one blending tool for that. Now you don't want to mix your oxides and your inks because they are different consistencies and different elements, so you definitely don't want to do that. But if you're using distress ink pads for both colors, you should be fine using one blending tool. So as you can see here, I'm adding my vintage photo, and then I'm going to come in with my walnut stain just for the edges. So when I did my vintage photo, I had it laid flat on my media mat. And then when I added my walnut stain, I lifted it up because I really just wanted to add those dark edges to the sides of my tag. And like I said, if I was going in an assembly line, I would add all of my vintage photo to my tags first. And I wouldn't even have to re-dab my blending tool into my ink. And then I would work into my walnut stain. All right, so now that I have my edges all inked up, we're going to make it pop a little bit using this distress glaze. So as you can see, I have my embossing dauber, and I'm just going to generously add some of this embossing, this clear embossing ink to the edge of my tag. And then once I have it covered all the way around, I'm going to take my distress glaze and I'm going to add it to the edge. Now what's great about the distress glaze is it gives it a translucent look, but it still gives it a little bit of color. And as you can see here, the color that I'm using is speckled egg, which matches this card perfectly. It has just the nice subtle blue that I'm looking for to edge up this card. And added over the vintage photo in the walnut stain just really finishes it off nicely. I think sometimes we forget about just the little touches or the details. Like I said, we could have easily left these tags stamped without adding this extra step, but I love the finished look of having the walnut stain and the vintage photo around the edge, and then adding that embossing distress glaze just really makes it pop, and it just helps your focal point as well. And then once you have that embossing glaze all around the edges, again, you want to take your heating tool and heat it up. Now, typically, I would probably use some sort of a tweezers, but I couldn't find my tweezers. So I grabbed the first thing that was on my desk, which was this little paintbrush to hold down my tag. And then I'm just using my heating tool to make sure all of my distress glaze around the edges is completely dry. Now, remember, embossing powder or distress glaze is a plastic that when dried will shine, and it is hot, so give it a minute to dry so you don't burn your fingers. And just like that, with just a little bit of ink and some embossing glaze, you've turned an ordinary tag into an extraordinary, beautiful vintage tag. So each week I'm going to come back and I'm going to bring you a new Christmas video for my 12 weeks of Christmas. I'm also going to give you a weekly freebie, so be sure to check the links below. Now, I know not everybody has this 12 Days of Christmas graphic 45 stamp set. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find it and link it for you. But as an extra bonus, I'm going to go ahead and give you a digital sheet of 12 Days of Christmas stamps. And you can print these out and use these for your card projects this Christmas as well. So I hope everybody's enjoyed my first video for my 12 weeks of Christmas, and I hope that you subscribe to the channel and click that bell so that way you are notified every time I upload a video. All right, everybody, I'm going to finish off these tags by adding my twine. I'm going to do all 12 tags, so stick around to the end so I can share my images. Thanks so much for stopping by, everyone, and we'll see you again next time.